No one ever said it out loud, but Rowan Beckett had been dead to his family for years, not buried in the ground but erased one photo at a time, one memory at a time, one Sunday prayer at a time. His name, once written in silver ink on birthday cards and holiday invitations, had vanished without a trace. In its place, silence muttered shame in a new family portrait where his face no longer belonged. He was born into a family that believed in order. God first, reputation, second appearances, always the Becketts were known in their Indiana town for three things: their lineage, their church, and their unspoken rules. And Rowan had broken the ones that mattered most. He'd told the truth about who he was. Coming out at 18 wasn't a rebellion, it was survival. He'd spent years rehearsing the words in his head, whispering them into the wind while feeding chickens behind the barn, or scribbling them into margins of hymnal pages during church. But when the moment came, it wasn't dramatic. He simply said, "This is me," and that was enough to make his mother cry and his father, Reverend Beckett, walk away without a word. Within weeks, Rowan's scholarship from the church mysteriously vanished. His belongings were packed into plastic bins and left on the porch. His bedroom was converted into a sewing room. The locks on the house were changed, and in a family group photo shared that Christmas, there was a subtle crop where he used to stand, his shoulder edited out like a stain on an otherwise perfect image. But there was one person who never flinched: Catherine Beckett, his grandmother. Everyone in town called her Miss Catherine. She had been a battlefield nurse during the Gulf War, a widow at 35 and a quiet force behind many of the town's unspoken mercies. She never raised her voice, but when she entered a room, even church elders sat straighter. She had seen enough blood and grief to know what really mattered. And when Rowan's world crumbled, she was the only one who called, who whispered, "You're still my grandson." He moved to New York and tried to build a life from scratch. Odd jobs, small apartments. Chosen family. He worked in theater lighting, blending into the dark corners, stages where other people told bold stories. But in every email he wrote to Catherine, he buried the loneliness under updates and jokes. And every month, like clockwork, she sent back a handwritten letter and a recipe she knew he missed from childhood. They hadn't seen each other in person for years. Travel was expensive, her health was failing, and the family made sure to keep them apart. Yet somehow, across the miles, she remained his anchor. Until the day everything stopped. It was a gray October morning when Rowan's phone rang, showing a number he didn't recognize. Something in his chest tightened before he answered, as if his bones already knew the truth. The voice on the line was soft, professional, a hospice worker from Woodridge Retirement Home. Catherine Beckett had passed in her sleep, peaceful, just after sunrise. He thanked the voice. He didn't cry, not yet. But as he stood alone in his tiny apartment, surrounded by stage blueprints and unopened mail, he felt something inside him split. The last person who had called him family was gone, and with her, any thread connecting him to the world he came from. What he didn't know was that Catherine had left behind one final act of love, one that no one in the family could stop, and it was already in motion. What if the only person who ever truly saw you was gone? What would you do to honor them when the world says you don't belong? Follow Heart Stories to hear the rest of Rowan's journey and the extraordinary legacy one grandmother left behind. The town hadn't changed. The people had. Or maybe they hadn't at all. Rowan stared at the screen, fingers trembling above the keyboard. He had typed and deleted the same message 6 times. "I heard about Grandma. When is the service?" But no matter how he phrased it, he already knew the reply wouldn't be kindness. Still, he pressed send. The response came quickly, colder than Indiana frost. "It's a private family gathering. You're not welcome. Let her rest in peace without disruption." No name, no sympathy, just the kind of silence that screamed louder than any insult. That text came from Evan, his older brother, the new head of the family since their father passed. Evan, the golden son who inherited their father's scowl and their mother's talent for looking right through Rowan as if queerness had made him a ghost. When they were kids, they built tree houses together and made dumb videos pretending to be news anchors. But after Rowan came out, Evan became the first to suggest in front of everyone that maybe Rowan needed spiritual correction. And now Evan had taken it upon himself to make sure Rowan wouldn't be at Catherine's funeral. Rowan didn't reply. He just sat at the edge of his bed, numb. His suitcase lay open across the floor with only half the essentials inside: black shirt, slacks, the scarf his grandmother knitted him before he left home. The scarf still smelled like cedar and peppermint oil. He opened his laptop and searched for flights. One-way last-minute expensive New York to Indianapolis declined. Try again. Booking error, third-time reservation cannot be completed. Please contact customer support. Rowan blinked. Maybe it was a system glitch. He switched browsers, tried again. The same block, he called the airline's hotline and sat through 5 minutes of music before someone picked up. After giving his name, the tone of the agent subtly changed. "Apologies, sir. It seems there's a security hold on your passenger record. I can't override it without supervisor approval." Security hold. Rowan had never even had a speeding ticket. The only thing more confusing than the denial was the way it felt familiar. Like someone had planned this. A few hours later, while pacing the sidewalk outside his building, his phone buzzed again. But this time the message was different. It came from an email address he didn't recognize. "Hi Stone, Legacy at airmail.org, Mr. Rowan Beckett. A first-class legacy flight under the name of Catherine L. Beckett has been initiated. This journey was arranged in advance and pre-cleared through our Executive Affairs Division. Your boarding pass and instructions are enclosed. Please arrive at Terminal 3, Gate 12 with valid ID." This itinerary was activated per her request on file to honor a private agreement. At first, Rowan thought it was a scam, but when he opened the attachment, the ticket was real. High Stone Airlines Rowan said assigned legacy passenger valid that same night. He stared at it for minutes. Then again, what had she done the next morning? Rowan walked through the automatic doors of LaGuardia Airport, his mind still reeling. He wore the scarf, his grandmother's ring on a chain under his shirt, and a face that hadn't truly rested in years. At the check-in counter, before he could say anything, the clerk smiled gently and whispered, "Mr. Beckett, we've been expecting you." He was escorted without asking through private security. No line, no ID check beyond a glance. No questions. In the exclusive lounge, a woman in uniform approached and handed him an envelope. "Your grandmother requested we deliver this personally," she said softly with something more than professional courtesy in her voice. The envelope was thick, sealed with wax, and smelled faintly of lavender. Rowan took a deep breath before opening it. Inside were three things: a letter in Catherine's unmistakable cursive, a black and white photo of Rowan as a boy sitting in her lap, and an old Army Nurse Corps medal. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means I've gone, but you, my boy, you were never meant to stay erased." The cabin door shut with a soft hiss, and the hum of first class settled into a strange, reverent quiet. Rowan sank into the seat, unsure if he was supposed to feel honored or just hollow. The seat itself, plush, navy leather, felt like it belonged to someone else, someone accepted, someone who hadn't been banned from his own bloodline. He placed the letter from Catherine on his lap, unopened since the lounge. He hadn't been ready, but now, above the clouds with the world far below, and the woman who raised him buried beneath it, he began to read. "My dear Rowan, I'm sorry I couldn't keep the promise I made to always be there when you needed someone. My bones have grown too tired to fight the weather, but not too tired to remember. I remember everything. I remember your first tantrum because I wouldn't let you put glitter on the dog. I remember how you asked if boys were allowed to cry after watching The Iron Giant, and I said only the best ones do. I remember your eyes the day you told me who you really were. And I remember thinking, finally he's free." Rowan swallowed hard. She had always seen him fully without squinting or revising him in her head to make him easier to explain at church. It had scared him then. Now it broke him. The letter went on, "I knew your mother and Evan would try to keep you away. I knew they would talk of disgrace and legacy, forgetting that love is the only true inheritance. So I made arrangements. This flight, this seat, this letter, all of it was purchased with my war pension and the sale of my wedding ring. I had no use for gold in a drawer. I wanted to give you a way home they couldn't touch." She had done it without telling anyone, not even Dean, her hospice nurse. Catherine had always understood the rules of control: who held the keys, who wrote the guest list, who got to define family. And quietly she had written her own chapter outside of theirs. Halfway through the flight, a young flight attendant approached. He looked barely 20, nervous, respectful. "Excuse me, Mr. Beckett," he said, voice hushed. "I was asked to give you this." On the silver tray was a mug of tea and a slice of apple cobbler. It smelled like home. Rowan blinked. "Did she?" The attendant smiled, nodding. "Your grandmother sent the recipe to catering a year ago," she said. "If you ever boarded under her name, this should be waiting." A year ago, that meant she had started planning this long before her final diagnosis. Perhaps she had known what the family would do. Perhaps she had just known them too well. The tea tasted like the kitchen windowsill at sunset. The cobbler was imperfect, just the way she made it. Cinnamon heavy, too much nutmeg. He let it burn his tongue a little. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, as part of our legacy passenger program, We'd like to take a moment to honor a former Army nurse, Ms. Catherine Beckett, whose memory is being carried home today by her grandson, Rowan Beckett. The voice over the speaker was calm, professional, but the moment it ended, something shifted. A few passengers clapped softly. A couple looked his way. One older man over the aisle placed a hand to his heart. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. She had made sure the world would know not only that she lived, but that he mattered. As the plane began its descent into Indianapolis, Rowan looked out the window. The clouds parted like curtains, revealing the old patchwork fields of his childhood. Barn silos, frozen roads. He once biked down just to get away from the noise inside the house. He hadn't expected to return here. Not like this. Not through the front door of a plane, welcomed with honors, armed with a letter instead of a battle, but Catherine had rewritten the ending, and he was no longer just returning for her, he was arriving for himself. The town hadn't grown. If anything, it felt smaller. The way people looked at Rowan confirmed it. Eyes lingered too long, heads tilted slightly with recognition, and something else, hesitation, maybe pity, maybe fear. To them, he was still the boy who ran off to the city and came back different. The car sent by the airline dropped him in front of the funeral home's stately brick ivy crawling up its side like old gossip. Outside, a cluster of families stood near the entrance, wrapped in dark coats and strained expressions. He spotted Evan first, tall, composed jaw, clenched like it had been carved from ice. His mother stood beside him, her eyes fixed on nothing. Rowan stepped out, clutching Catherine's letter and medal in his coat pocket. He didn't expect a welcome, but he didn't expect the words either. "Turn around," Evan said sharply before Rowan could even reach the steps. "You're not part of this." Rowan met his brother's eyes. There was no hatred in them, just control. The same kind Catherine had fought against her entire life. The same kind Rowan had grown up learning to tiptoe around to avoid the sound of doors slamming or voices tightening. "I'm here for Grandma," Rowan said evenly. "You were removed from the family registry." She knew that Evan replied, "This is a private service." Rowan's mother remained silent. She couldn't even look at him. Her gloved hands clutched a rosary like it might shield her from the presence of her own son. He would have turned back once years ago, but not today. A man in a gray suit stepped outside the funeral director. He cleared his throat. "Are you Rowan Beckett?" he asked, glancing between the two brothers. "Yes, you're listed in the will," the man said. "She requested you be present before the casket is lowered and that you be given something personally." Evan stepped forward. "We've already arranged the..." "She put it in writing," the man interrupted professionally but firmly. "It's legally binding." Inside the chapel, everything was crisp and untouched, flowers white and symmetrical, a portrait of Catherine placed on an easel, but the woman in the frame smiling gently, wearing her nurse's uniform, and a carnation pinned to her lapel, felt more real than any of the guests. As the pastor droned on, Rowan sat in the last row, the scarf she made tucked beneath his coat. He could feel his presence irritating the room like a scratch in a hymn. Then came the moment. The pastor closed his notes. The casket was to be wheeled out, but the funeral director raised a hand. "There is one more request from Catherine Beckett herself." He walked toward the casket and lifted the lid. People gasped, some in offense, some in confusion. Inside was a small wooden box. The director opened it and pulled out a sealed envelope, then read aloud, "This letter is for Rowan, my grandson, my true family. If they tried to keep you away, it means they never knew me at all. I want you to know, Rowan, I didn't just leave memories behind, I left the truth, and I want you to read it here out loud before they lower me into the ground." There was a pause, a vacuum of silence so thick you could hear the air conditioners hum. The pastor nodded reluctantly. Rowan stepped forward, hands trembling, but voice steady. He unfolded the pages and read, "They said you embarrassed the family, but I was never prouder than when you spoke your truth. They said love between two men was unnatural, but I served in war beside men who loved each other so fiercely, it kept them alive through fire. They said blood is thicker than water, but they forgot who bled for whom. Rowan, you were the only one who visited me when I could barely stand. You sent me music when the house was quiet. You gave me the only honest version of family I had left." A woman near the front began to cry. Rowan folded the letter, kissed it, and tucked it into the breast pocket of her casket dress. He did not look back at Evan. He did not seek his mother's eyes. He walked outside as the casket was lowered. The wind was sharp, but his shoulders didn't flinch. She had given him a place, not just in her heart, but in her story. And now, even in death, she'd made the whole town listen. After the funeral, Rowan didn't go back to the hotel. He didn't go anywhere. He wandered. Through streets that still knew his name in whispers, past the high school where he'd once stood, backstage painting flats for a play his parents never came to see, past the church where his father used to preach fire and mercy in the same breath. Everything looked the same and neatly trimmed, well-behaved, but the air carried a charge, not of welcome, not of exile, just change. The next morning he visited the grave alone. No flowers, just frost on the stone and a sky the color of old parchment. The grave marker hadn't been engraved yet, only a wooden plaque with her name. He sat on the damp earth anyway and took the medal from his coat pocket, placing it beside the marker. "You weren't just brave in war," he said quietly, though no one was around. "You were brave here too, where it's quieter." Meaner, he stayed until the cold crept into his knees. That afternoon, as he prepared to leave town, the funeral director called. There was one final item left in Catherine's personal effects, with instructions for Rowan to receive it directly. He returned to the chapel and was handed a weathered leather binder. Inside, a collection of letters, legal documents, and handwritten notes. At the top was a notarized statement. Catherine had quietly updated her will years ago, leaving a charitable donation to a local LGBTQ+ youth shelter, made in Rowan's name. He flipped to a typed page, signed in and dated, "To whom it may concern. This donation reflects the values of my grandson, Rowan Beckett, who represents everything good I've come to know. Courage, tenderness, and integrity. If any member of my family disputes this gift, let the record show that silence in the face of truth was their choice, not mine." It was a declaration not just of love, but of defense. She had shielded him even in the places he couldn't reach. Attached was a scanned photo of the two of them. He was 12, clinging to her waist, covered in flower and joy. On the back in her handwriting, "Family is not who stays in the photo. It's who stays in your corner." The next week, Rowan stood before a small crowd at the youth shelter in Indianapolis. He didn't read a speech, just shared a few memories. About a woman who wore steel in her spine and honey in her voice. About how she taught him to find dignity even in silence. Afterward, a boy approached him, maybe 17, shoulders hunched like someone who'd been told too many times to shrink. He didn't say anything, just held out a folded note. Rowan opened it later alone. It said, "If someone like her could love someone like you, maybe there's hope for someone like me." That night, Rowan flew back to New York. No first-class seat, no medal in his pocket. But something had changed. He no longer carried the grief like shame. He carried it like a flag. In the months that followed, he returned to the stage, not behind the curtain this time, but in front of it. He told Catherine's story in a one-man performance. Sparse, at minimal light, just a chair and a scarf and a letter. The audience wept quietly in the dark, and every show ended the same way. Rowan would step forward and say, "I was not supposed to be here. Not in this life, not in this town, not at her funeral, but someone fought for me before I could fight for myself." Then he would hold up her letter, pause, and speak the line that never failed to echo in the silence that followed. "You were never meant to stay erased. Has someone ever stood up for you when the world stayed quiet? Or were you the one who had to become your own defender?" Thank you for following Rowan's story. For more powerful journeys of truth healing and chosen family, subscribe to Heart Stories, where stories like his find their voice.